Welcome to the Empathy Stories channel, where we share powerful, life-changing moments that remind us of the unexpected twists life can take. Today's story is one of shocking revelations and deep emotional connections. Join us as we follow a millionaire's incredible encounter with a homeless woman and her children who look just like him. The streets of New York City bustled with the usual chaos, a symphony of honking car horns, the constant hum of traffic, and the quick-paced shuffle of pedestrians. Yet amidst all this movement, Clara felt like she was stuck in slow motion. Every step she took seemed to echo louder than the last, reverberating in her mind, amplifying the weight of her circumstances. Clara had always been a fighter, but the exhaustion had begun to settle into her bones. Her brown skin, once radiant, had faded, weathered by sleepless nights and a relentless search for anything that might offer a glimpse of hope. At 32, she had never imagined herself in this position. She had once lived in a different world, a world where dreams had seemed achievable, where a young woman like herself could build a life on her own terms. But those days felt long gone. Now, she walked along the sidewalk with her twin daughters, Maya and Sophia, clutching her hands like lifelines. The girls were only 5, but they had already seen more hardship than any child should. Their small hands, once full of innocent curiosity, now gripped tightly to Clara's, a silent plea for reassurance she wasn't sure how to give. It had been months since they lost their apartment. The landlord had raised the rent, and despite Clara working long hours cleaning houses, it had become impossible to keep up. She had tried everything, taking on extra shifts, borrowing money from friends, even considering loans, but nothing had worked. Every effort had fallen short, leaving her standing in a city where nothing seemed to offer relief. Clara had promised herself that she would never let her daughters feel the weight of her struggles, but it was getting harder to hide it. The truth was, she was terrified of the uncertainty, terrified of not being able to provide for them. And yet, she carried on, because what else was there to do? The girls had been quiet lately. Maya, usually the more talkative of the two, had stopped asking questions about the future, as though even she had sensed how fragile their existence had become. Sophia, ever the optimist, had asked her mother every day if they were going to have something to eat, her innocent questions breaking Clara's heart a little more each time. "Mommy, are we going to eat today?" Maya's voice cut through the fog of Clara's thoughts. Clara knelt, brushing the hair from her daughter's face, her heart breaking at the sight of her tired eyes. "Soon, sweetheart," she replied, forcing a smile. "Mommy always finds a way, right?" Maya didn't answer, her small hand clutching Clara's even tighter. It was a momentary comfort, but it didn't last long. Clara stood and continued walking, her thoughts racing. They had wandered through the city for hours, searching for a place to rest, a warm meal, anything to offer them a break from the harsh reality. Clara had been so focused on finding a way out of the suffocating rhythm of survival that she barely noticed the world around her, until the skyline began to shift. They were in an area she didn't recognize, beyond the urban sprawl, where the streets began to show signs of wealth. The towering glass buildings gave way to posh restaurants, luxury shops, and designer boutiques. Clara's heart sank. This was a world she no longer belonged to, a world that had slipped out of her reach. Her feet moved mechanically, but her mind was elsewhere, lost in thoughts of what could have been, what had gone wrong. Her daughters, oblivious to the grandiosity around them, continued their little exploration, their eyes wide with wonder at the unfamiliar sights. Clara found herself pausing, her gaze drawn to the elegant shop windows that seemed to mock her efforts. She couldn't help but compare her life now to what it used to be, what she had lost. As she stood there, lost in her own thoughts, she saw him, across the street, leaning casually against a sleek black car, stood a man she hadn't seen in years. His dark sunglasses shielded his eyes, but there was no mistaking the confident stance, the sharp suit that clung to his frame, and the unmistakable air of success surrounding him. It was Michael. Clara froze, her breath caught in her throat as the memories of their past came flooding back. Michael had been her first love, the man she had thought she would build a life with. They had been inseparable once, their connection undeniable. But life had a way of changing things, of taking people on different paths. And in the end, Michael had left. He had left her when things got tough. The breakup had been hard, more painful than she could have ever anticipated. It wasn't that Michael had been cruel or callous. It was that he had been pragmatic. He had chosen his future, his career, and in doing so, he had walked away from her, from the life they had dreamed about, from her. Seeing him now, standing across the street in a world of luxury and privilege, made her stomach twist. She had never imagined she would encounter him again. Not like this. Not when her life was so broken. She didn't know what to do. Should she cross the street and confront him? Should she pretend she didn't see him? The idea of facing him, of having him see how far her life had fallen, filled her with shame. But then, she saw him glance up, and their eyes met. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. Michael's gaze softened, recognition flickering across his face. It was enough to bring a rush of emotions, long-buried feelings, bitter memories, and a longing for what might have been, before she could turn away, before she could hide herself from the past. Michael pushed himself off the car and started walking toward her. And just like that, Clara's world shifted. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the city streets. New York's skyline loomed ahead, towering over Clara and her daughters as they passed by storefronts and glossy glass buildings. The world around them seemed to move in a rush, people darting in and out of shops, oblivious to the struggles of the woman walking with her children, each step more uncertain than the last. The city was a place of dreams, but for Clara, it had become a place of endless waiting. She had lived here for most of her life, but now, New York felt like a foreign land, a land where she was invisible, where no one saw the tired mother struggling to get by. It wasn't the city's fault. Of course, it was just that she had fallen so far behind, and it felt impossible to catch up. Maya tugged at Clara's sleeve, her small voice once again breaking through Clara's thoughts. "Mommy, I'm hungry." Clara's heart twisted, but she said nothing. There was nothing she could say that would make the hunger go away. She had no food to give her, and even if she did, she wasn't sure it would be enough to fill the empty void that had been growing in her stomach for weeks. They had survived on scraps, on kindness from strangers, and whatever Clara could scrounge together. But those days were getting harder, and she knew it. They continued to walk, the city's hum filling the air. But Clara's mind wandered. The twins were quiet now, their faces tired, their eyes dull from hunger. They walked with their heads down, just like Clara, their small hands gripping hers as they moved through the streets. It wasn't until they passed an upscale boutique that Clara noticed a shift in the air. She looked up and saw a sleek black car parked across the street. It gleamed under the late afternoon sun, a symbol of a life that seemed out of reach. Standing beside it, leaning casually against the polished metal, was a man dressed in a dark suit and sunglasses. His presence was commanding, and though Clara could only see the silhouette of his figure, something about him felt familiar. She stopped in her tracks. The world around her seemed to slow as memories flooded her mind. Memories of a time before everything had changed. Before the struggles. Before the exhaustion. It was Michael. Michael, the man who had once been her everything. He had been her first love, the one she thought she would build a life with. Their relationship had been intense, full of passion, but also full of miscommunication and mistakes. In the end, Michael had left, unable to handle the weight of their problems. It had been years since she had last seen him, but the ache in her chest, the raw, bitter reminder of everything they once had never truly gone away. As she stood there, frozen in place, Clara felt a mix of emotions: regret, anger, longing. The memories came rushing back, uninvited, pushing her back into a time she had tried so hard to forget. She had never expected to see Michael again, and certainly not like this, standing on the streets of New York, looking as though he belonged to a different world, a world that Clara had left behind, a world she had never fully fit into. For a moment, Clara didn't know what to do. Should she turn and walk away? Should she approach him? Even after all this time? Her heart raced as she weighed her options. She felt a surge of anger, but also a flicker of hope. Could things be different now? Could they both have a second chance, despite everything that had happened? But before she could make any decision, Maya and Sophia, who had been distracted by the city's lights and sounds, looked up and saw Michael standing across the street. Without hesitation, they tugged at Clara's hands, urging her forward. "Mommy, who's that?" Maya asked, her voice innocent and curious, oblivious to the history between Clara and the man across the street. Clara felt her stomach drop. She knew she should protect her daughters from this moment, from the possibility of another disappointment. But somehow, she felt powerless to stop them. She watched as Maya and Sophia, eager and full of childlike curiosity, pulled her closer toward Michael. Michael, too, had noticed them. His eyes widened in recognition as he took a step forward, his posture shifting slightly. For a brief moment, it seemed as though time itself had slowed. Clara's heart beat faster as Michael approached. She wasn't sure if it was fear or excitement, but she was certain this moment, this encounter, was about to change everything. He reached them just as Clara opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. For a second, it felt as though the world around them had disappeared. There was only Michael, standing before her, his gaze searching her face as if trying to remember the woman he had once known. "Clara." His voice was soft, but Clara could hear the surprise mixed with something else, something she couldn't place. She nodded slowly, her throat dry. "Michael," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. And then, the twins, wide-eyed, stared up at him, waiting for Clara to explain who this man was. But Clara wasn't sure what to say. Would they even understand? Would Michael? Could she even explain the pain, the years of heartache that had led her to this moment? The moment hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken words and the weight of time that had passed between them. Clara stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat as she stared at Michael. It had been years since they had last spoken, years since he had walked away from their life together. And now, here he was, standing before her like a ghost from the past. Michael leaned casually against his sleek black car, absorbed in his phone, oblivious to Clara's presence. The sun gleamed off the car's surface, highlighting his expensive suit and dark sunglasses. He looked every bit the successful man she had imagined he would become. Clara's heart raced, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Regret, anger, and an undeniable sense of longing. She hadn't expected this. New York City was a vast place, but seeing Michael here, of all places, at this time, felt like fate had a twisted sense of humor. "Mommy, who's that?" Maya's voice, soft and innocent, broke through the fog of Clara's thoughts. Clara's heart sank. She hadn't wanted her daughters to know about Michael. Not yet. They were too young to understand the complexities of her past. She was trying to shield them from the pain. But fate had a different plan. Maya and Sophia, ever curious, had already begun walking toward Michael's car. Clara watched them approach. Her instincts kicking in, she had to protect them, keep them safe from the past she had fought so hard to leave behind. But it was too late. Before Clara could move, Michael glanced up from his phone, his eyes locking with hers. A flicker of recognition passed across his face, followed by a moment of hesitation. It was clear that he remembered her, but there was no warmth in his gaze. The years of silence, of unresolved issues, hung between them like an invisible barrier. Clara, his voice, though surprised, was devoid of emotion. It was a question, as if he wasn't entirely sure if it was truly her. His posture stiffened slightly, his cool demeanor slipping for just a second. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She had no idea what to say. The words that had once flowed so easily between them now seemed lost, tangled in the years of hurt and regret. She forced herself to speak, her voice trembling. "Michael." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Maya and Sophia stood by the car, now looking up at Michael with innocent curiosity, unaware of the tension between their mother and the stranger before them. For a brief moment, Michael seemed unsure of what to do. He glanced at the girls, and then back at Clara. The old, familiar discomfort of their past settled in between them. It was clear that there were no easy words left, only silence, heavy and thick. "I didn't expect to see you like this," Michael finally said, his voice flat. "I didn't know." Clara forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't expect this either." For a second, it felt like time had rewound itself. Clara saw the man she had once loved, the man who had walked out on her when everything started to fall apart. She remembered the dreams they had shared, the plans they had made, but those dreams had crumbled, just like everything else in her life. Maya tugged at Clara's sleeve. "Mommy, who is he?" Clara knelt down, looking into her daughter's innocent eyes. "It's just someone from the past. Sweetheart, come on, let's go." As she stood up and took the girl's hands, Clara felt Michael's gaze on her, but she didn't turn back. She couldn't. The past had already left its mark, and there was nothing left to say. "Take care of yourself, Clara," Michael called after her, his voice soft but distant. Clara didn't reply. She simply walked away, feeling the weight of everything she had been through, everything she had fought for. She didn't need him anymore. She had her girls, and they were her future. As they disappeared into the crowded streets of New York, Clara knew that her journey wasn't over. There would be struggles ahead, but she had already come so far. And as long as she had Maya and Sophia, she would keep going, no matter what. Thank you for joining us in today's story. We hope it gave you a fresh perspective on the hidden struggles many face and the surprising connections that life can reveal. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories that remind us of our shared humanity.